All right, we're going to call the meeting, this hearings to order. This is the Regional Public Transport Plan hearings. Just a couple of things first. This is the idea of this is to be relaxed as submitters. So there will be questions, but they'll only be questions of clarification. Submitters have got 10 minutes to speak. I suggest they work on 8 minutes and allow 2 minutes for questions, because we have to keep, we've got quite a tight time frame, so we will be keeping to order. Phones on silent or off, please, if you would check. Apologies, we have Commissioner Selwood on Zoom as a commissioner, and Mayor Judy Turner from Whakatane is about to arrive. She'll be here in a minute, she said. There are no further apologies, but we'll put Mayor Turner down just for lateness. Would you like to, I'll move it, would you like to second it, Jane?
Yes.
Moved and seconded, all in favour, please say aye. So I have to advise that members that this is a public hearing which has been live streamed and recorded. The recording will be available on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website following the meeting and archived for a period of 3 years. To those members of the public here today, all care will be taken to maintain your privacy. However, as a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded. By remaining in the public gallery, it is understood your consent is given if your image is inadvertently broadcast. I also remind all present that the local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council officers, and the public for comments made during the meeting that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. With that happy note, I will ask Nigel Tutt, I think you're presenting on behalf of Priority One. Welcome, Nigel. You're well aware
from slander. It's good.
We're happy to for you to present.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thanks. Hi, Stephen. Which was the camera. Right. So you'll have our submission. I'm going to take that as read. So there's only 2 things that I want you to remember today about our submissions. The first one is we would love you to be more aspirational. And the second one is that we're here for you all the way. This is a team effort, right? On the first, the plan has a bunch of aspiration in the right areas around load shift and climate change, but I feel it falls really short in terms of what action you're going to take. So aspiration must be backed up with action. It looks to me like you're just going to do the same stuff. You're maybe saying different things, but you're going to do the same stuff. You already have a system that is declining in terms of performance now. So doing the same thing is not going to yield you any different results and will probably continue the decline you've had. We're not transport experts, and you'll never see us pretend to be. And we know that you have contractual arrangements, particularly around buses and the likes, that aren't that easy to break. However, something different must be done. So we've humbly made some suggestions in terms of things that might work. So smaller buses, it seems odd to have, and it looks like a very 1970s type bus network. Big, large buses with a few people on them, perhaps smaller ones with more frequency. More bus-only lanes and T3 lanes potentially. The focus on renewable energy and being zero emission, I don't see that much in there. And as you know, we've put hydrogen things in front of you before. Unfortunately, they haven't really received any meaningful reception. So I would encourage you to get involved in newer technologies if you do want to make a change. Working with urgency around a ferry service, and you've worked somewhat so far, but it certainly hasn't been with urgency. I feel that this is an area that needs more modes, and to not check those out with any degree of enthusiasm would seem a little naive. And then potentially consolidating how public transport is delivered. It looks disjointed at the moment, probably gets the results from being disjointed, and you should consider how you can consolidate that over the course of time. And then there's newer things like on-demand buses and the likes. What I'm really trying to get at here is a user experience type of mentality, where it looks at the moment like public transport is run for efficiency and for contractual means, and I know you have requirements there, but it doesn't look like it is run for the customer. And you don't see too many operations that improve throughout the world without the focus on the customer. So we're basically saying be as bold as you can. It doesn't look very bold at the moment, and you should look at yourselves in terms of how bold you want to be to make change. But you can be as bold as you like in this area. And importantly, in doing that, you'll have our support, right? We're all in this together. Everyone in the business community supports the concept of better public transport as part of a well-functioning transport system. So you will have businesses and all of their staff here to support you in this journey. It's a mutual goal that we all have to reduce emissions, to improve productivity, to make it easier for people to access work and the likes. So it's a shared goal. So we as Priority One, obviously with the large business membership that we do have and contact those businesses and their staff, are here to help you. So please be bold. Please use others to support you in that effort. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much for that submission. Councillor Needs.
Thank you, Nigel. You partly answered one of my first questions, which was how specifically would you make changes to the plan? So you've given us a whole lot of suggestions. Does that include accelerating our targets or changing the sort of targets that we've set for ourselves?
I don't see as much of a challenge with the targets. I see a challenge with what you're doing to get to those targets. To me, the targets, it doesn't really matter what they are. They look pretty meaningless without a good action plan.
Okay, thank you. And just one other issue around you mentioned the applications that you made for funding to do some research on refitting existing buses to use as hydrogen. Have you looked at the low carbon transport fund? That's a new government fund of $18 million to do just this sort of work. Yeah, we have.
It's pretty difficult. That's run by ECA. ECA is negative towards hydrogen, but despite MB being positive towards hydrogen and indeed the government ministry being positive towards it. So that's been difficult, and of course we can't do that without people who use that. So we'd hoped that Plenty Regional Council as runner of the buses would take a leadership role there, but unfortunately that hasn't happened. The cold reality of what will happen is that everyone else will do this stuff now. So all of the effort going into hydrogen will be purely private sector, so heavy vehicles and the likes as we seek to build offtake. So that's fine. You don't have to have a part in that. Just don't claim that you want to have a part in it if you're not willing to be into it.
Any further? Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Fantastic submission. Can you just advise your membership, have they been pretty supportive of the Wednesday challenge?
Yeah, they have, and I know a bunch of our members are part of it. Heidi would be better to speak to the actual amounts of activity that's going on there. But businesses are supportive of change in this regard. They're frustrated that not much has been done. So they'll leap onto anything, and I would expect them to do that 5 days a week rather than one. But yeah, certainly supportive of anything that encourages them to.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Selwyn on Zoom.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Nigel. I think it's an excellent submission. The one area that is touched on in the plan that you haven't mentioned is the potential for road pricing in some sort of shape or form to both lift productivity of the current network, encourage mode shift, and raise funding for reinvestment back in the system. Interested in your thoughts on that possibility, because I think we all acknowledge that we need to do more, but how do we achieve a step change from the current incremental kind of world that we're all living in at the moment?
Yeah, good question, Stephen. So we obviously haven't discussed road pricing in great detail with businesses because it's more of a concept at this stage, but in every discussion I've had, they've always been supportive of that. Which way am I looking at? Am I looking at that? Okay. It's kind of weird. Yeah. So the equation for businesses are they're frustrated now that there has been a lack of investment in transport infrastructure in this region. And they are quite willing to pay. And they're quite willing to pay because for the average transport logistics business, what you simply need is more trucks and more people to drive those trucks. So one, it's more cost. Secondly, you're looking at labour that's damn difficult to get at the moment. So they'll take anyway. A small cost around road pricing is actually quite good in the scheme of things. And they're asking about how they can more actively contribute to that. They're also increasingly aware that despite the region funding more things over the course of time, the government hasn't necessarily kept up with that and been part of their end of the bargain. So they know that a contribution from the business community may well help that. So in short, Stephen, I would expect them to be very supportive of that. And we'd be very happy to help that conversation and support it further.
Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you very much, Nigel.
Thank you.
Appreciate your input.
Cheers.
Thank you.
I apologise for being late. I'm sorry, I got pulled into the traffic.
Oh, yes, it's a problem. How ironic.
Our next submitter is Debs Turner. Debs, if you'd like to come and take a seat, and the floor is yours for up to 10 minutes.
Yep. Hello, my name is Debs and I'm here because I care about people, care about the bus service and care about that. And love to see a better bus service that is more friendly and saves time for passengers. I believe, my talk is I believe by doing a full review into our bus service will help more passengers get the bus. Some of the buses are always running late, but the 59 is always late. Leaving from Gleason into town. The number 5 is always late. The number 5 going to the Mount is always late. So we need to leave at 1:05 to sign out, and most times it's not gone before 10 past. So we need to look at timetables. And the 21 going to Bayfair is always late. What about bus to Bay Park? What about running more buses New Year? The other day I saw, this is for you, Steve, the other day I saw an elderly lady struggle to sit down on the wet grass because as there was no bus shelter, no bus seat for her to sit on, she struggled to sit down on the wet grass and wait for a bus to come. It's for you, Steve. A lot of the buses don't like split, a lot of the bus drivers don't like split shifts. And some burn out. My friend just about burnt out because she was doing split shifts all the time. We need to look into that and be friendly to our bus drivers. Buses not in service could be used better by running a better bus service. Bus drivers are by running the 22, by running 22 to Peppermore Plaza, stopping off at Bay Park on peak hours, we'll see another bus going to the plaza from town, but a different way. I get that bus a lot, and 90% of the people get off before the city. So you would have a different way for people to go, and have the Te Puke run from the city to Peppermore Plaza, and then to Te Puke. Replace the number 2 buses going to the plaza. You could still get 3 buses going from plaza from town, but going different ways. Because at the moment, a lot of the buses are empty, which will save a lot of time for our passengers. Could not have to transfer at Bayfair. People going to Te Puke won't have to transfer at Bayfair. They could go straight there from town. And people from Peppermore could go straight to Te Puke, because I caught that bus one. And the Te Puke, if you want to go to the plaza, you have to transfer, you have to go all the way to Bayfair first and then come back. Then you go back to Bayfair to get to Te Puke. That is so time consuming. So if we ran a bus through to plaza from Bayfair, it would save a lot of time and we would improve our customers. by doing this, a fuel refill could help. I believe in having an Rptp bus will save a lot of bus timetables by having a bus from the city to the lakes, crossing city, Fraser Cove, Greason to the lakes, Greason, hospital, city, hospital, and running it anti-clockwise would save a lot of time for people to the hospital without having to transfer at Greason and Fraser Cove, because a lot of people go all around the shopping mall. Like you could go from Fraser Street straight to Peckinsale. It would be a lot more sense. In the bus from Bethlehem to the crossings running anti-clockwise, people from Bethlehem could pass straight to the crossings without having to bus to town, then to Greason, and it would save so much time by having a bus run through Bethlehem. Because when you bus everywhere, you know, it's just time consuming. If I'm at the crossings, I have to bus all the way to Greason and then bus to town, then bus back out here. Time consuming. And another thing I like to see is a Whakatane Rotorua bus, even if we have it one day a week. Buses leave city at 9 o'clock, Peppermire, Mount Bay, Bayfair, Peppermire, Te Puke to Rotorua, giving people a chance to get into town, leaving again at 1:30. And that would give, it wouldn't be too long a day for elderly people. Whakatane bus leaves again at 1:30. Whakatane bus hours too. People off the boat could catch the bus from the Mount to Rotorua. And it'd be good for the elderly for not making it a long day. Even if there was one day a week, people getting out of town, it would be willing to do the story. I'll be willing to do stories. You could look at doing look at doing deals at cafes. So many people on the bus, if they went to that cafe, they get a free coffee or something. And that would help encourage people. I believe improving our customer service on that bus would increase passengers. By improving our customer service to the bus drivers would see more people, bus drivers wanting to stay a lot. Of the bus drivers don't want to get, sorry, I think it should be. Giving enough time for drivers to get where they are going. I believe in running some of the buses anti-clockwise would save time for the passengers and for the bus drivers. These bus runs, people from Peppermire College could bus to the shops. So we need an anti-clockwise. Peppermire needs and would benefit. And also anti-clockwise for the motor bus. We can run the bus anti-clockwise and you've got two sides of the street covered instead of just one. And also I'm willing to talk more to someone about this because I don't have time to cover everything. Both sides of the street. I believe I'm willing to come and talk to someone. Yeah. I also believe planning the bus runs should, the people planning the bus runs should also catch the bus for a while and they would have a better understanding of the people who catch the bus because it is, you waste so much time. I believe by having the taxi route system for some old people, because they do that Bayway, would save a lot of old people waiting at bus stops and when the bus doesn't turn up. And some old people don't know how to use the phone, so it would save a lot of time. I believe that we can turn this bus service into something awesome, improved customer service and time-saving bus service and make it more enjoyable for people. It would be good to see improved customer service, especially for children, because it would give them a good experience and they would want to encourage them to catch a bus when they're older because they can remember the excellent bus service we have. I don't know how I can talk more about that in today's date, but I've got so much to cover that is, you know, that my main points are anti-clockwise, bus service, improving our customer service and having a bus to Rotorua and Whakatane.
Great,
1 day a week.
great submission, Debs, as always. Questions of clarification. Councillor Thurston.
Debs, it's always great to see you.
Yeah.
And be assured that there's nothing better at this game than a lived experience.
Yeah.
And what you share with us is taken on board by all of us.
Yeah.
You know, and I hope that the next council or the next triennium
Yeah.
really taps into your lived experience.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to improving the whole service.
Yeah.
But can I just change tack for a second?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're aware that I've spent a lifetime in the disability sector, but
Yeah.
can I ask you in terms of people with disabilities?
Yeah.
This council has made a lot of work and effort into improving access to services for people with disabilities. What issues are we not dealing with at the moment that you feel we should be?
It's too much walking time. By the time you see, if I went out to Papamoa East, there's only one. It's like if you get on at the Papamoa College, there's no bus that goes to the shops. So if you went anti-clockwise, because I went out there yesterday especially, to see where the bus runs, and you would save the bus actually double backtracking if you went anti-clockwise. And people from Papamoa College area don't want the bus all the way back to Plaza to get to the shops. Those are time consuming. It's just the walking and the lack of bus seats, which is not your problem, but shelters and bus seats. And
But in terms of the no fees for people with
that's really
disabilities, has
good.
that gone down well within the sector?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have a lot of friends who are using it. And
I've been encouraging people to use
wonderful. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you very much, Deb. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. We've had a number of submissions about smaller buses and on-demand services. Have you got any thoughts about them?
I haven't really looked into it at the moment, but there's smaller buses, maybe if you had smaller buses running in the centre, and then like if you had Orpita, you have a bigger bus, because the smaller buses would take the people to the bigger area where more people actually catch a bus on the main bus route.
Yep.
Have bigger buses for the main bus route. And another thing I would have is have more buses running in the morning, peak hour buses, because not a lot of people like actually getting the same bus as the school kids. And I think I noticed a big change once the school kids came on the bus. There was a drop in passengers because a lady said to me last week that a lot of people, the kids won't stand up for the elderly or anything, and so they have to stand. Some of the bus drivers will encourage the kids to stand.
Commissioner Selwood.
Thanks, Debs. I appreciate your submissions each time. You raised the matter of the bus stops. And as you may be aware, there is an investment program underway. The good news is about 20 of those are ready to start. There's about 150 in addition to that in the pipeline, and notices have gone out to the residents in each of those locations. Unfortunately, quite a few people have objected to having bus shelters outside their properties, and so we'll have to go through a hearings process for that. But the ones that we can get on with, and they're in the hundreds, will go out to tender this in October, and so we'll soon see the rollout of those. There's about another 100 that there are issues with power supply and power lines, and so we're going to have to find a way around that. And then there are several locations where the physical land beside the or where the bus stop is prevents development, so we'll have to talk with the regional council about potential relocation of those stops to places where we could have shelter provided. So whilst it sounds easy to put out a whole bunch of bus shelters, and we'd all love to see them quicker, the good news is 20 or so are on their way. That'll be followed by 100 or so as the hearings go, and the rest will roll out as soon as practically they can be.
And a lot of our bus shelters, they don't actually shelter us from the rain. A lot of the shelter us from the rain, we still get wet.
we're running out of time.
Okay, yeah.
You've actually gone over time by 3 minutes,
Okay.
which is not like me. I don't normally allow that.
Okay,
So
thank you.
well done you, and
Yeah.
thanks for you're a prolific submitter
Yeah.
to us, and we really
But I
actually
look
do,
forward to hearing
we
that.
do appreciate it. Thank
Yeah.
you. Our next submitter is Russell Williams, submission number 35.
Is this for me?
That's for you to sit there, sir.
No,
That's-
That's only for your presentation.
before I start, Mr. Chairman, could I ask for the current status of your 7 objectives there? This is page, whatever it is, page 9 of your little brochure, which is all I've gone by. I'm concerned, it says 70% of dwellings in Tauranga and Rotorua are within 50 metres of frequent public transport service by 2030. Now, I'm sure these things have been in place for some time, so I would appreciate that. And I appreciate that the plan that we're discussing today is for 10 years. However, my objective in addressing you today is to submit several considered proposals that should and could be implemented forthwith. My focus is obviously from an elder's perspective, and I speak from my own experience. It's my hope that Council's executives start to focus more on people when planning bus timetables and routes. I'll deal with the simplest improvement and probably one at the least cost in my submission. Simply change all the light bulbs and buses to LEDs. The route names and numbers above the windscreen on a lot of buses are very hard to read. And it's even worse in the sunny weather, and you get buses coming in, which is my one. That's number one. Number two is a request that you reinstate Route 1 from Pies Park to the Mount Pools via Cameron Road. Currently, Route 1 does not cater for passengers wishing to go from Pies Park, and I've got a lot of examples. Tauranga RSA, the Tauranga Hospital, Path Lab, Citizens Club, the Warehouse, there are 3 churches, the Boys College, the Girls College, Pack and Save, New World, and the main Countdown supermarket. Megamiter 10, and of course the hot pools and beaches, Mount Maunganui. And pity the poor cruise passengers trying to get from the port to the city or to Pies Park, and I have experienced it, and I can tell you it's a minefield. My view is that a monumental error was made in demoting Route 1 from the major cross-city service to a feeder service from Pies Park to the inner city stand, currently, of course, in Durham Street. Number 1 suggests premier, major, and important, and some of your planners have lacked appreciation of the importance of a city having a premier route. The third thing is to recast the timetable so that Greerton at least, I just can't get that page open. So that Greerton at least, all buses on routes 1, 55, 59 and CT allow time for passengers to transfer from one to the other. I've got 2 simple examples of timetable disasters. And the task in these is to get from Kopu Drive Pies Park to Tauranga Hospital. The start time at Kopu Drive on Route 1 is 9:40. You arrive in Greerton on stand A at 9:45. You have to cross Chadwick Road from stand A to stand B to wait for a Route 55. And that timetable misses a connection. So you sit at stand B until 10:15, and then you arrive at the hospital at 10:21. The time involved, theoretically is 41 minutes and on bus time 12 minutes. So the times are fabulous, but it's all the waiting and crossing the dangerous street. But it's even worse going home. This is from the hospital Pies Park. Let's say you've spent a bit of time seeing somebody. You depart the hospital at 12:30 on Route 55. You arrive in Rptp Stand A at 12:39. You cross Chadwick Road from Stand B to Stand A to get onto Route 1. And that leaves at 12:55. And that arrives at Coker Drive at 13:10. That's 40 minutes to get home and 24 on the bus instead of 12 going. Fourth recommendation or submission is to relocate bus route 51 to terminate at the mall end of the crossing. Currently, the bus stop at the crossing is close to Pack and Save, but shops are accessible only if you can negotiate about 20 steps. Why were the needs of elders and mothers not considered? Can anyone imagine a person with a pram or a shopping truck catching that bus? It's instances like this I have illustrated that suggest a lack of understanding by your people who plan such things. I suggest in the case of the crossing that the elevations of the shopping centre's public areas did not receive proper critique from council executives. So let's go shopping at the crossing using 51. 51, sorry. It leaves Coker Drive at 13:15 on this is 51.
Mr. Williams, just you're giving a wonderful synopsis, which I really appreciate. I see you've got it writing. Those are operational minutes, and I really love it if you could leave your submission with our staff rather than go, because you'll end up running out of time if you know, and we want to have time.
All right, I've got three proposals. The first one is create Rptp as a true interchange hub where buses wait for interconnecting services. To help that, we make better use of existing radio telephone networks. Drivers ask passengers if they are needing to transfer for their onward journeys on the next bus. If yes, then the bus waits, for example, at Rptp for the other bus to arrive. The last one is that we start catering for special events. I hope that consideration is given to extending services to venues such as Bay Park, the Domain, and the Cricket Oval, etc., for large events and occasions. My proposals are all very visible and measurable, so I will be monitoring your progress with great interest.
I'm sorry I missed your second request, sir. I was writing. I got the green
true interchange. Make better use of radio telephone. Okay. The driver says, anyone going on this or that.
Thank you.
Yes, and they radio it here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Questions of clarification? Any? No?
Oh, it was an excellent submission.
Yeah, but I would really encourage you to either leave or email our staff there, because there's a lot of there's a lot of detail in there that certainly would be good to look at.
And I want to be very specific and very clear.
I think you have been, and it was a good submission. And we thank you for taking the time to actually bring it to us. And as well as that, sir, you are at 7 minutes 45. You've made us up a little bit of time. Thank you. I've got other ideas too. So the next one is Harry Perry. Harry, you've got 10 minutes in total. So if you can make sure you're finished at least by 8 minutes, so that we've got time for questions.
I'll try my best. All right, and your presentation. Just the first slide. Okay. Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Rptp. I'm a Year 10 student at TBC. I'm here today to give my suggestions regarding the draft regional public transport plan. So without further ado, I'll begin. I begin by bringing your attention to policy 2.4, our regional public transport plan. This can be found on page 21 onwards. In particular, I would like to bring your attention to the Tauranga and Western Bay of Plenty public transport network, a network that I believe is in need of desperate change. Our current system focuses heavily on taking passengers in and out of the centre of town, with connectivity between the suburbs and other major centres relying on this one point. While we do have connectivity at transfer points such as the Okawiti stands, Windermere, Greerton and Brookfield, most of the time these transfer points are inconvenient. For example, transferring between the 40 and the crosstown to get to the crossing only allows 2 minutes. This is unrealistic. If the 40 bus, for example, is late by 1 minute, which it regularly is, then you only have 1 minute to transfer. This transfer requires you to walk uphill and around a corner. For someone carrying their shopping bags or having small children or anyone with a disability, this is extremely annoying and stressful. And it's an easy fix with just a small adjustment to scheduling. And there are multiple examples that I'm sure you've heard and will hear later on about this, although it's far from a major change needed to increase the ridership of our services. As you can see from the okay, as you can see from the current network map, this current system works as sort of a spider web network. A spider web or hub-based system relies on the principle that the hub, or in this case, a Tauranga CBD, is a major location that people want to go to, as well as a place where people can connect. So, next one.
You should have the.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Unfortunately, this current hub-based system is not suitable for Tauranga, and based on data that the council has collected in the plan, this transports an astonishingly low 1.3% of our population every day, which is just shocking. Tauranga residents want and need a reliable public transport network that takes them where they want to go and makes a profit, not a loss. As Tauranga is built around narrow peninsulas, creating a hub location in the middle looks well on paper, but in practice is a little different, well, to say the least. If you were to walk in the centre of town, what would you see? Parking meters, few cars here and there, some restaurants, a Wall Street which costs millions that isn't popular, a temporary bus exchange, and probably a lot of for sale signs. Although if you were to walk around the crossing, what would you see? A large variety of shops, people coming in and out, a bustling food court, shops you know and love, and many, many, many more people. Yet what's the place our bus system prioritises taking people to? The centre of town. The system is a disgrace, and it all begins with the network design. My solution is simple. It's just that.
When did it mean?
Oh.
No?
No. I just have to do it manually. Oh, there we go. Create connections from the suburbs to multiple key locations in Tauranga instead of relying on one single hub where everything can go wrong at. Key locations could include the Crossing, Bayfair, the Mount, Papamoa Plaza, Toyohomai, and Brookfield. This way, if a delay occurs of one part of the network, not everything goes to chaos. Not only does it reduce the chance of delay, but it also provides more options for travellers, which allows catching the bus to become more of an attractive option over the car, which can lead to an increase in passengers, possibly reducing our $6 billion losses. I've presented this concept in the past on multiple occasions and would be happy to advise councillors on this further. Operating a model such as this will reduce the loss we're making and most likely lead to the profitability of the system and achieving mode shift, which is what we all want. Rates and taxpayers don't want their hard-earned money to be funding a not profitable system. They want a profitable system that they can rely on to get around every day. These changes also lead to policy 4.1.1, a future strategy in the Tauranga and Western Bay of Plenty. I'm suggesting changing the future strategy of our public transport network and how we design routes to something like this, increasing our ridership numbers, preventing us from digging deeper and deeper into debt. To move on, I want to touch on policy 4.2, specifically the sub-policies on page 46. Zero emission public transport is mentioned. As it's the goal of central government to decarbonise the public transport fleet by 2035, this should be a key focus for bus operators such as New Zealand Bus. Although our current fleet of electric buses is not fit for its purpose and not worth cost. After 7 years, the bus batteries need to be replaced. Unfortunately, these batteries cost over half of the bus's cost, and it's far more worth it to just buy a new bus, instead of the hassle of replacing the battery and disposing of it in a safe and environmentally friendly way. These buses are also not fully electric. It is shameful that the buses say all electric for the environment on site, when diesel is used for air conditioning. The council needs to invest in electric buses and or the development of fully electric buses that are optimised for efficiency, passenger comfort, but most importantly, comfort of drivers, to provide a familiarity across the entire fleet. Moving on from zero emission public transport, passenger rail is a key area that in the plan that needs more attention. While Tauranga is in its current state can't support a rail line connecting suburbs, as the city grows, it will become more necessary. How difficult is it to make a light rail line instead of flyovers? Look at the flyover near Bayfair, for example, a complete and utter shambles. If the council still can't see the benefits of light rail and refuses to do anything related to it, then what about intercity rail? Intercity rail lines could replace our intercity and regional bus services, most likely reducing traffic on the state highways. Rail infrastructure will become more important as we go into the future, with almost endless possibilities to connect regions, cities, and our country. So why not get a head start on the bad bit? Before I go, I'd like to return to policy 2.4, our regional public transport plan. As I said in the beginning, we need to make a radical change to the network in Tauranga. Why should the centre of town be in a location that's not the true centre of town? Tauranga doesn't have a main centre of town anymore. The residents of Tauranga spend their time all over the city in multiple places, some of which is shown on screen. Despite the efforts of the councils for years wasting the money of tax and ratepayers, this hasn't changed and will not likely change in future for a while. Return the bus system to profitability by changing the routes to where people want to go, utilising multiple hubs, a network that has proven itself time and time again overseas to work. While I'm suggesting a complete overhaul of the network, this massive change can't all happen at once, and it needs to be brought out progressively, 1 or 2 suburbs at a time. In the last meeting of the Public Transport Committee, that is, I brought out first to Martin. So why not? Why not change part of the network and achieve mode shift? Does the council not want a profitable system? To conclude, I've made my my suggestions for passenger rail, zero emission public transport, and most importantly, the bus network of Tauranga, and how we can together make it profitable. But before I leave, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the members of the Regional Public Transport Project team and the other members of council that made this possible. I look forward to working with you all to achieve significant change. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or clarification? Mayor Turner.
Yes.
Thank you, a fantastic submission, thank you. Just, I want to pick up on something. I've been doing a bit of reading about public transport internationally, just to kind of get a sense where New Zealand sits in that space and ultimately us. And one of the things that I've discovered that was interesting was that very rarely is it profitable around the world, because but the gains are seen in actually low emissions, low congestion and things like that, which are great outcomes. So do you think profitability is an important target
Well, it definitely is an important target. Obviously, it's not as important as reducing our emissions, but I don't want to be funding a $6 million loss system. I don't think anyone here wants that. So why not have a profitable system?
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Nathan and Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Harry. I really enjoy your presentations. Make me wish I had a magic wand, but anyway, you made some comments around school students, and you suggested that we think about charging school students using urban services.
Yes. Well, as there was a use case I was pointing towards there. The 40 outside boys college takes kids to the suburbs of Welcome Bay when there's a perfectly usable school service that I personally use every day, and that leads to the overcrowding of the urban service by school kids, leading to not enough people, not enough paying customers being able to get on it.
Right. Do you find the free bus service for use of value?
Yes, it is definitely use of value, although I do support the council and I'm only having it during certain times.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. No?
We are running short of time, but yes, Councillor Thompson.
Sure, another few minutes won't matter.
Oh, okay.
Harry, absolutely fantastic. Thank you. What a future you've got in front of you. Harry, just I'm interested to know whether you and your friends use the public transport system over the weekends.
Well, we try to, but we quite often go to the crossing, but it takes an hour to get there. And as I've mentioned, there's that inconvenient transfer that we've actually missed the bus personally once, even though we're quite fast at running. But yeah, I would like to use it more, and I think everyone would, but it's just too inconvenient to get anywhere if it takes an hour.
Thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you.
Another great presentation. And we will get back to you with to let you know, after we've made our deliberation.
It hasn't fallen on deaf ears, has it?
No.
Well, we'll see. No, I'm sure it hasn't. Our next submitter is submitter 56, Julian Fitter. Welcome, Julian. You've got 10 minutes in total. I suggest you go no more than 8 minutes so that there's at least 10 minutes for questions.
Yep, thank you, Chairman. Kia ora, everyone, members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Julian Fitter. I'm chair of the Bay Conservation Alliance. And you might ask why, as an environmentalist, talking the public transport thing, but I believe that we are all together in this. You cannot separate the environment from social issues, and transport is a very clearly an environmental issue in many ways. And I think if I can say, and I come from the other end of the age spectrum from your previous presenter, who was extremely impressive and with whom I agree in some areas. But I see a public transport system needs to have two clear, in the current time, two clear objectives. One is to be efficient in moving people around the city and around the suburbs. And the second one is to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. That seems to me to be an absolutely key priority, that we need to do something on that, whatever else we do. Otherwise, we're actually, at the moment, as my original submission suggests, we're actually going backwards. Instead of actually reducing emissions, we're still increasing them. So we do have to bear that in mind as one of the key features of whatever decisions you make. Tauranga is, I suppose, if you were to come to it today with no city here, you'd say, well, let's build a town here. It's obviously not suitable. But we are here, and we are constrained by our topography, and we have to work with the harbours, and it's not a dissimilar situation to Auckland, where you can't just build where you want to So I would say that one of the key things we have to do, and I was involved in the UFT process, and I think it's absolutely key that we end up with more modes of transport. At the moment, we've got basically car and bus, and the bus service is obviously, as other speakers have indicated, not terribly efficient and could be much better than it is. The two most obvious areas that we can improve are rail, where we have a rail line that runs into the CBD and yet isn't used for passengers and yet was in the past. So that's an obvious area. And sea, there's a small amount of ferry traffic, I believe, at the moment, but it's obviously could be used to much greater effect. And I think it's important that, and that's something that could be done relatively easily, doesn't require a great deal of extra infrastructure, no roadworks and things like that for the most part. So I think that's an area that is really important. But the third one I'd like to put in, and I don't think why everybody seems to ignore it, is overhead gondolas. They're quite a number of cities around the world, seem to be South America seems to have switched on to the gondolas as an option, but it seems to me that it's an extremely good way of getting across the harbour rather than building a bridge with multi-million, hundreds of millions of dollars, I would imagine. A gondola system would be a very much cheaper way of getting people across. And I think it would work in with the hub system, which other people have mentioned already. And it seems to me that that is a, we need to think broader and wider on these things and not just say, that's it, this is what we've got. And the other thing I've always liked was the idea of light rail up Cameron Road. But an alternative might be gondolas up Cameron Road if you didn't want to mess up the system so far. But it seems to me we have to think wider. We must think a bit more, be a bit more imaginative in how we think about these things. And the hub system, which a number of people I think have put forward, seems to me to be a very obvious way, because you can then have much better local communication with smaller vehicles, so that you don't have this huge amount of these great big buses trying to get around small residential areas, but you can actually use minibuses of various sorts around there. So that seems to me, let's start thinking a little bit wider and not just assume that this is what we've got. We need to be bold, and because we have a very distinctive city, and a city which is growing very rapidly, the whole region is growing rapidly, and it is a prosperous region. After all, it's, and the regional council is the wealthiest council in the country, after all. So I think that we need to say, right, look, let's try and set an example for the rest of the country. This is how you can do things. So I think we also need to bring in the possible, we need to provide carrots, we need to provide sticks, you need to provide the carrot of the better public transport system, but you also need to start thinking about, do we need to put charges in, congestion charges or tolls of some sort to try and discourage the single vehicle traffic? It would be really nice if there was a good system, even if it was with park and ride on the outside, so that you could drive here and then get into a public transport system. But it's really, I'm living in Makatu, I don't really have any choice. I have one bus a day, I think, in and out, and that takes about an hour and a half probably to get to the CBD from Makatu. And it seems to me that if we could start developing express services and then have feeder systems into it outside of the hubs as well. I could take a bus to get to Bookies, a beacon, but there'd be an express bus that would run along there, or probably actually up to State Highway 2 and run along TEL as well. So lots of, just I say, be broader on that. Another thing, one of my latest things, I don't know if any of you have come across the concept of diesel hydrogen hybrid vehicles. If you read the Herald, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, there was an article, a large transport company, private transport company in South Island is experimenting with these. And I believe, in fact, that James Shaw was here at the weekend and he was talking, he learned about it apparently in Tauranga. And it's a relatively inexpensive way of cutting the emissions from your diesel buses by 50%. And it seems to me if Tauranga is looking to reduce its emissions, this sort of technology is you can adapt a diesel engine to run off hydrogen and diesel at the same time, effectively. and it can run, but if it runs out of hydrogen, it can still run on diesel sort of thing. That's the advantage of it. And it's a relatively inexpensive, I think the figures they quoted were a hydrogen truck was cost about $1 million. To convert a truck to hydrogen diesel hybrid was about $130,000 or something of that nature. So it really is a genuine, it's a new technology I hadn't come across before, but I think it's something that, you know, would work pretty well here in the Tauranga area and would help us immediately to cut down some of those emissions that are coming out of the buses. So that is all I have to say, but happy to answer.
That gives us some time for questions. Are there any questions of Mr. Fitter?
I've answered.
Look at that, you've
Yes,
answered
I'm
them.
impressed. I'm glad I've helped you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I do have a question. The vanadium flow technology,
Yes.
could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, vanadium. Well, it's a liquid battery, as I understand it, but it cut the attraction of vanadium flow is that it's indefinitely reusable. So the problem it has with, as compared with a lithium-ion battery, is it's much bigger on the whole. They have not yet managed to sort of miniaturize it. So it would work probably on a truck just about, but it works ideally as a stationary, fairly large installation from that sort of side of things, and it can be used especially with things like tidal power, extremely useful for that, where you've got known regular amount of energy coming in, and then so that the battery takes over in the slack periods, so to speak. So it's used in a number of cities. Are they using it in Australia? I know in the UK there's a thing called the Oxford Hub, which is a big one where they use vanadium flow batteries. But it's definitely a way that, and certainly Tauranga with the tidal streams that we have, there's a possibility that it might be something that could be used here. But it's certainly it's one of those technologies which, for some reason, New Zealand is very, very slow at times at adopting new technologies. And we get stuck in this particular way. This is what we've got to go. We've got to have electric vehicles. I personally don't think EVs are the answer. I don't think there's enough lithium in the world to provide all the batteries. Is the trouble. So we've got to look at these. Everything's got to be solved with multiple, with different technologies working together.
Thank you, Julian. That was very simple.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And we will get back to you when we've done our deliberations. Our next speaker is Glenn Crowther, submission 42. When you're ready.
And yeah, I just thought I'd whiz through a few key points and then hopefully a bit of time for questions. There's a lot that I could say, so the summary version would be that there are a number of social issues that I've raised in our submission, which I think are critically important. And there are plenty of other good submissions, including oral submissions, that have been and will be to come on those topics. So I'll sort of leave that there. I think there are some important sort of structural issues that have been addressed, and Harry sort of raised some in terms of just connecting points, the overall network structure and so on. So again, I'll sort of leave that to the side. Happy to answer questions at any time on that stuff. But probably for me, the one thing that has been driving a lot of change in other regions has been the carbon target. So I'll sort of address that primarily. And in the context that we're behind here in the Bay, I think we all know that. And in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, there are 50% targets to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. So that's sort of the way those councils have gone, and that's total emissions. When it comes to transport, Auckland, I think, has done the most work on that, and they have come up with and reaffirmed this week the target of 64% reduction by 2030 in their transport emissions. So the general thinking is that if you have a target, let's say 50%, which is somewhat in line with international targets for overall emissions, then you have to do an even higher reduction for transport, because there are some things that are in our society that you cannot cut out the carbon at the moment. We don't have the ability to do that. So transport is something that, however challenging it is, it's a daunting challenge, but it's still a possibility to reduce those emissions. So it has to be more than the 50% target if we want to get an overall reduction in line with what's needed. So I guess my concern is where the Bay of Plenty sits in this and where this plan in particular aligns. And I think a couple of you raised questions on Wednesday, which cut to the chase there, I think, which is why are we not revamping the Tauranga transport system plan, which in turn is quite influential across the whole of the Bay of Plenty. So we need a bay-wide approach. I think there are issues that are critically important for Rotorua and in Whakatane as well. But I think if we can get it right for Tauranga in terms of integration of the plans, and that was raised by Commissioner Tolley, it was raised by John Robson, it was raised in other submissions. I think we have to integrate this so that everything aligns, but in particular the targets around carbon emissions. So, so I sort of see what we're doing at the moment is still making incremental changes and trying to do mode share increases, which are not really going to be at all comparable with anywhere else in the country. And so Hamilton yesterday, I should say, or earlier this week sometime, has reaffirmed their plan for, they have a lower overall emissions reduction target of 30%. I understand the transport one is about 35 is what they're looking at, but I can't share that if anyone else knows that. But whatever it is, it's more than the Bay of Plenty, which is currently sitting at 25. But this plan, to me, looks like it's trying to work in as best as it can with the established, agreed collaborative targets between AFTI, TSP, and the PT blueprint. And I think it just means we're so far off the pace. So that target there to increase Tauranga through a morning peak share to greater than 5%. I mean, it's really, you know, it might seem a challenge, and indeed it probably is in the context of dropping patronage, but it's not at all where we need to be to even be in the same ballpark as the other New Zealand councils. The next step up, I would say, which I'm putting as sort of the middle ground, is to align with the government's emissions reduction plan and the work that's being done in reducing vehicle kilometres travelled, and some of the other work that's been done around the country in terms of how to increase PT patronage and the targets that we should adopt. In that case, you know, I think we need to shift that measurement from a peak time mode share for public transport to an all-day mode share, or at least have both measures. So one of them, the peak time one, typically is to deal with congestion. But if we're talking about carbon emissions, you know, it doesn't really matter what time of day people travel. It does matter how long they're stuck in queues, but overall, the better measure is to take an all-day mode share, which in turn will probably reflect a more likely reduction in CO2 emissions from you know, single occupancy vehicles. But even that, you know, best that I can see is that would roughly, potentially, if everything else fell into place with EVs and so forth, possibly help us get to 25% reduction by 2030. But we've already just said that the 25% is lower than all comparable other regions in the country. So even if we stepped it up massively from what is being proposed in this plan, it would still not be anywhere near enough to sort of get to that high level. So Auckland took a different approach. They joined C40. You know that I've been advocating that. Certainly the regional councillors here know that I've been advocating that for a number of years. C40 has done a lot of work in terms of equity. So they have looked at global equity issues and said that in a country like New Zealand, in a city like Tauranga especially, that we have the wealth and the ability to do far more to reduce our emissions than most countries in the world. So when you look at the footprint, the carbon footprint of African countries or many Asian countries and so forth, it's just tiny compared to what our individual footprints are. So you then do what Auckland does, which is, right, we want to own this, we want to figure out what it would take, and they have come up with fairly robust analysis that shows, you know, you have to do at least your share globally, and the IPCC says for carbon dioxide that means in current terms it's a 60% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2030 from 2020 levels. So that's the you know, the based on the 2010 initial target that they had. So it's basically we have to cut our total emissions by 60. So Auckland's transport goes a bit higher, even though they're only trying to cut their total by 50. So even Auckland's behind. Even, you know, IPCC says Auckland's got to do more, but they're just in a completely different ballpark to what we're planning to do. So I guess, you know, I mean, I guess it's up to how you want to approach it, where you see the cuts to carbon come from. But the only way I can see this is to massively increase the patronage and the mode share for public transport. And the key point that I want to make is that we have done that before. And at the time, the argument was, we won't be able to get a massive increase on public transport in Tauranga because we only have a few 100,000 people using it in the early 2000s. So you can't expect too much because we're just a tiny little place and you can't expect many people to use the buses. A decade later, we had a 6-fold increase. So now I hear the argument, well, you can't expect us to do that again because we're much bigger. We've got lots more people, we've got lots more buses. So you can't expect us to get a 6-fold increase. But I would say we're better placed than we were back then. And we need to just—
You need to wind it up.
Yep, no, I will. So here's the contrast. I guess the challenge that I'm putting out is we need to do a lot more. We need to base it on a lot more analysis. And that means investment upfront into all that work. Resource, you've got some great staff, and to resource them to actually work through these issues. But you all have to show leadership, I think, on this, or else it won't happen.
So, thank you very much for that, and I completely agree with you, actually. But can we talk about mode shift? And it's very easy to talk about. Yep. And you say 5%. You know, we're the big aim is for 20%, but you know we're showing that. And we are confused a little bit in our plan because we do talk about peak times in some parts of it, then we talk about all day, and I think that needs clearing up. But can you tell me how we're going to do it? Because we've been talking about mode shift since 2005. And yes, we've made some incremental changes, but we've really only moved the dial from 0.5 to 1.5 in 15 years. So what's the game changer?
I don't think that, I've always said, I don't think it's a single game changer. I think it needs to be a completely integrated set of plans, which particularly focus on urban development and transport as a integrated model. So I supported AFD, I supported the, when it started out, what they were trying to achieve, but I just think it got it completely wrong. It did not listen to, didn't go out to the community, it didn't listen to stakeholders, it set the wrong targets. It's not going to deliver what you're asking for, Mr. Chair, and I think what all of us want. I don't think it's easy. I think Auckland is going to be very unlikely to hit its target, but the point is they've figured out which kind of ballpark they're in. So they're saying we don't want to do something which is going to be expensive, complex, and alienate the public and still not deliver a target. That's what we're setting out potentially to do. They're saying, if we're going to do this, let's embrace it. Let's be upfront with rates and charge an extra, whatever it was, 2.something% on Aucklanders. They supported that strongly. We could do the same, I'm sure, but we have to give up some other things. We have to not invest, as people like Harry have said, in failed ventures in the city centre rather than into a really strong low carbon model.
Any questions? We're running out of time. Councillor Thompson, then Councillor Rees.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. Firstly, thank you for an incredibly comprehensive written submission. Yeah, I thought it was very, very thought-provoking. But I've got two questions. My first one, what's wrong with a 50 from your perspective? And secondly, when you are talking transport emissions, what makes up those transport emissions?
So the second one first, it needs to be embedded or embodied emissions in construction and maintenance of the transport system. And I think, I mean, roads, that takes a lot of carbon, but so do railways for that matter, to maintain them especially. So it needs to include that. But my understanding, and I'm open to the updated version, but I still think that the tailpipe emissions from vehicles is the biggest aspect. But I understand, what I think some of us heard on Friday from the minister, that the embedded or embodied emissions are really significant, and I think he was quoting a higher figure than I thought. But wherever it sits, we have to include all that. And part of the answer to your other question is that none of that was even on the table in UFTI. So that not only did they not do a thorough analysis of emissions, but they didn't even define what emissions, they didn't define the scope, and they didn't define that as a key goal. They put a flawed environmental target, and the view, I think a number of us in the room, but a lot of other stakeholders were very strongly suggesting if you start out in the wrong direction, you're going to end up in the wrong place.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Councillor Rees.
Oh, Glenn, I'll just echo what Paula has said, an incredibly helpful and detailed submission, particularly around the targets and the suggestions. And you've made some wonderful suggestions, for example, timeliness, targets. So I really genuinely appreciate the effort that you put in. I do have one question, and it's you've noted that you support the submission of Wednesday Challenge, but you differ in their submission and that you don't support ferry. Could you?
Or just the ferry to Onokura, I think. Right. Hopefully I said that in the I wouldn't want to put the other one. So I do support a Tauranga Mount ferry, and but I just, and the only reason, I mean, I'm quite happy if you want to invest in the ferry to Onokura, like don't get me wrong, but I would rather the priority ought to be that you, instead of investing in the OPEX for that, as for putting aside the CAPEX, but the operating costs would be the equivalent of a number of bus routes around the city.
Keep it brief,
would be
please.
on demand.
We're really running over time. Mayor Turner.
You won't be surprised to hear this, but we feel like we're in the too hard basket in the East all the time. We get very little mention in some of these reports because we are hard. We've got we're one of the biggest council regions in New Zealand, serviced by and funded by a very small rating base. And we are defined by high levels of deprivation right across our entire district. And so we have some really big challenges. And in the middle of it, there are lots of health needs, and we've got private systems setting up, which we're all trying to learn off. But really, there's a lot of what's happening here, which I fully support for the West. We're not anti the West, but we just have to say that many of the solutions there, either we're just too small yet, but we are growing, and that's the other thing. The East is now growing in a way that was never anticipated beyond the figures that were predicted for us. And so looking for new housing opportunities and new development of new residential areas, that can have some impact if we design them well and put them in good places. But it is it might be a later date where you come and see us just personally and start to give us some advice around, which I'd appreciate, around what we could be doing to contribute meaningfully to what we're talking about here.
Can I just quickly say that
we really have to wind it up. We never got a question out of that, Glenn. So, but anyway, thank you, Glenn. As usual, always a well thought out submission. We move on to Roger Drower, submission number 64, and is this the one that you've got 65? Just for the Commissioner's help, Mr. Drower, is it Drower? Drower is hearing impaired, so make sure you speak clearly so that he can read your lips as much. Thank you, sir, for your, and I invite you to present to us.
Thank you. Morning, Chair and the councillors. And thank you for allowing me to come here today. My name is Roger. I'm representing the hearing dogs for the deaf people of New Zealand, and also I'm the spokesperson for Civil Defence right through New Zealand. So it's a privilege to be here. There are 8 organisations with disability service dogs under the Government Dog Control Act 1996. This is a privilege to have a service dog, not a right. So within New Zealand, we have certifications to go into all public places, council buildings, etc., shops and malls, and public transports. We have to all think about safety for service dogs and also members of the public as well. Under the Government Amendment Act 2006, is to protect us against demonstrations, and under the Human Rights Act 1993. It covers us under the Health Act under Section 120 ACC and the Bill of Rights. So we've got quite a few acts behind the disabilities service. Auckland bus driver, after a pet dog was on the bus first, rushed at a service dog. The person with the service dog was trying to get on the bus, was refused entry. The pet dog took rights over the service dogs. That shouldn't be the case. There are 25 service dogs has been refused on public transports within New Zealand. That is sad to see in our country. 4 in Wellington by bus, 8 by taxis at the Wellington Airport, and that equals 12. 3 in Hamilton on bus, 1 by taxis. 2 in Auckland by bus and 1 by taxis. Dunedin buses 1, Taupo buses taxis 2, Tauranga buses are 2, been refused. 1 in Napier by taxis. Let's educate all our bus drivers, and also taxis and all public transports. There are 8 disability organisations within New Zealand. From the Blind Foundation, the bus drivers or anybody else that's on public transport role are meant to stop to pick us up. That's not always the case. The client in major cities in the North Island has said that 3 times a week have been refused to pick up service dogs on public transports. That is so high. So in different parts of the countries and that sort of stuff there, disability dogs are being charged to get on the public transports. Pet dogs ain't. That is a concern in itself. One area is charging $65 for a service dog to get on the bus. Shocking, isn't it? And one part of the other country is $25. The government and the council staff needs to act on it. This is uncalled for, and this has to be paid by cash. So whose pocket is it going into? That's a huge, big question. Disability service dogs are being refused in entries in council buildings. This is shocking. Also, the CBD, Cambridge, the Countdown, McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger Kings, etc. VTNZ, camping grounds, all been refused. Wellington restaurant was refused a service dog and fined $3,500 plus court costs on top of that. That was not put in the statistics. So that was in total of 14. Within New Zealand, so far, service dogs have been rushed or attacked, a total of 19. This year is not finished yet. That's a concern in itself. On the other page, I've got here with 2 service dogs being attacked and had medical treatments by vets, 1 in Auckland and 1 by Taupo. They're all in the CBD. This is shocking. Now we have fake service dogs entering in our country through the internet. My job is trying to stop it, and I'm doing a great job at the moment so far for trying to stop that happening. But we have them in here in Tauranga, Auckland, Wellington, etc., and quite a few other towns where people are saying their dogs are service dogs when it's not. So under section 40 and 41, they're actually breaking the law. And councils are allowing them to get away with it. This needs to be hardened up, especially when it gets onto public transport, because these people are misleading people. There is a little bit of homework here for you guys to do, is look on some of the websites that I've attached to the paperwork. From one of the guide dog stories on the bus, it's shown a story was saying that members of the public are using it, refused people to get on to the public transports. Bus driver was so cruel, the service dog was put under the seat. With them, the dog got caught under the seat, and it was stressful for the handler and for the service dog. This is uncalled for. Abuses we're getting from different members of the public, and also bus drivers slamming on the brakes just to hurt the service dog. That is uncalled for within New Zealand. Thank you very much for your time, and that's part of my speech.
Thank you, Roger. Nice and concise. Do we have any questions of clarification? Councillor Thurston.
So Roger, have you come all the way from Tauranga today to present to us?
Yes.
Full marks.
Yes.
Full marks.
I've also did Wellington Region, Hamilton Regional Council meeting on the 17th. That was a couple of days ago. 16th. That was a couple of days ago. I've gone through there. It's a bit too far for me to go to Auckland, but I'm hitting our local areas here. Service dog, what I understand in Tauranga, the bus driver just kept on going, leaving them at the bus stop. Now that is shocking. That is happening within New Zealand. So education needs to go to them, because blind people can't identify the bus or the bus driver, but they know roughly at the time, and so, nothing's been done about it.
So Roger,
can you drop your hand down?
Sorry. So the take-home message that you'd like to leave with us is a greater emphasis on education?
Yes.
Yes.
I do a public, I do a presentation about the 8 service dogs within New Zealand. I go to schools, shops and businesses, and I can also do council as well. Educating them about the 8 types of service dogs within New Zealand and helping them to understand our rights and that sort of stuff there, more than over with pet dogs, and why is pet dogs having more rights going into shops. That's another huge concern in itself.
So Roger, the companies that you mentioned, the bus companies that charge, is it that per trip, or were they trying to extort an annual fee for a service dog to travel on their buses?
What I understand, what has been told to me, that some bus drivers, not all, is one particular has now been removed from the bus company. We're charging $65. That was outrageous, and it was going into his pocket, what I understand. That's what's happening with different people, vulnerable people like the elderly, people with disability, people are not 100% clear with fees. They're saying X, Y, Z, and these people are paying the money without no questions. That is a huge concern within our New Zealand country.
Councillor Neves.
Thank you. 2 very quick questions. One is, service dogs are certified by your organisation, and the owner gets cards.
Yes.
And so that can be presented on the bus.
Yes.
To legitimise.
Yes.
Great, number 1.
Also, our service dogs also has their jackets on, the colour of the jackets, which organisations they are from. We also have the civil defence tags on all service dogs, so that's another identification to identify them. That is not public knowledge, and that's what things we're trying to identify, and that with civil defence, if there's a crisis, that's my job.
Thank you. One other thing is one of the measures that we have, or one of the tools that we use, the mystery shopper, getting somebody to actually use our buses and report back on their user experience. Do you think it would be a good idea for us to consider?
Yes, definitely.
Shopper for a disability dog?
Yep.
Thank you very much, Roger. Very good presentation, and we will get back to you once we've done our deliberations. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Not be safe.
We have one more before we break for lunch, and we're running a little bit behind, I think, but so we'll have a short lunch. Can I call making rail? Oops, that we've got James calling in. James Llewellyn, staff and councillors will know James. He's currently in England, so he's probably had a hard night down in the pubs waiting for us. Am I wrong, James? Welcome.
You're completely wrong, but thank you anyway for the welcome.
Glad to hear it, James, and thank you for staying up late at night for us. The
Thank
floor
you.
is yours. You've got 8 minutes and a couple of minutes for questions, or at the maximum. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So hopefully you can see the screen and the slides. So Making Rail Work is basically a community proposal for reintroducing an interregional passenger rail link from Tauranga to Hamilton and then hopefully onwards to Auckland. Community proposals for rail services are actually quite unusual, and being in the UK, I've seen at the moment the issues we're having with rail strikes with the government and the unions and the private companies all arguing with each other about who is going to make the railways pay. Meanwhile, the community voice and the passenger voice is being ignored in all of that. So community involvement in rail as a principle, in my view, is very important. The Making Rail Work team is being, let me just, let's get the right slide up. So Making Rail Work team has been led by Katrina Ramage, who has written the report, which some of you hopefully will have seen and read. Myself, James Llewellyn, previously with the Regional Council, but now an independent consultant. And with me is Michael von Drogenbroek, who is very much in the rail technical space and also leads engagement with Kiwi Rail and Waka Kotahi. And in particular, a point we want to make is that both of those organisations are now much more open to discussions about interregional passenger rail. So this is a really great opportunity to take advantage of that. Making Rail Work, essentially, we are a bunch of business professionals and residents, and we fundamentally believe that rail connectivity is very, very important to New Zealand's future economy, social and economic development and sustainability. And we're presenting on the basis that we want to see investigations into regional passenger rail taken forward. We also have various members, including Paul Clark, who is a former United Kingdom Transport Minister and someone who is very knowledgeable in this particular area. We also have youth representatives, and also we're working with New Zealand Cooperative CEO, local and national politicians. And the point we're making is that cooperatives as a service model are not only appropriate for rail, but are also being used across other policy areas, including education, housing, and development. Recently, the Transport and Infrastructure Select Committee has announced an inquiry into the future of interregional passenger rail. And again, this is a great opportunity to put the case forward for future investigation and potentially investment. The terms of reference I've outlined in the box below. I'll just pick out three really key points. The first is to actually investigate the possibilities and viability of passenger rail in underserved communities. Those with prior rail links, which of course include Tauranga, where those have been disestablished, and advocating for improved rail links. And I think our key point is more advocacy and leadership in this area is required. The terms of reference also look at gaining insights into viability of the passenger rail sitting alongside Kiwi Rail's freight network. Now, it's really important to emphasise we don't underestimate the technical, financial and economic challenges of making an interregional passenger rail service fit for purpose and ensuring that the important freight services are not disadvantaged by the inclusion of interregional passenger rail. The bottom point is also really important, looking at specific areas, including Tauranga. The Select Committee are well aware of the Making Rail report and have referenced it specifically in these terms of reference. So there's an opportunity here for Tauranga and the Bay of Plenty to step up and show that leadership in the interregional passenger rail space. And hopefully a submission to the Select Committee will follow. In terms of comments on the RPTP itself, those are really in three main sections. The RPTP policy, we fully support the draft as is expressed in the document, but what we would like to see are clear actions and resources associated with implementation. We'd like a clear pathway of feasibility, business case work, and if appropriate, design and implementation activity. And as I say, the Regional Council being given the opportunity to take a much more proactive role in engaging with the rail sector, Kiwi Rail and Waka Kotahi in particular. In terms of the cooperative model itself, we would be very welcoming of the RPTP formally acknowledging the community aspirations to establish a cooperative for passenger rail services between Tauranga and Hamilton. And ideally, we would like a new policy in the RPTP, which, amongst other things, would outline in principle support from the Regional Council for investigation and establishment potentially of an interregional rail service, commitment to participate in the cooperative itself if feasibility and viability is established, funding for business case work in the next regional land transport plan, and also agreement to provide in-kind staff resource from the regional transport planning team. I would emphasise that I would not want the existing priorities to be compromised by that. So, we'd be looking for more resource, hopefully, for the team to be able to participate in that process. And the final area is around leadership. So we're looking for Regional Council and indeed all of the councils in the Bay of Plenty to provide that promotion of passenger rail, but both at the political and the senior officer level. The Waikato region really has led the way with Te Huia, and as a result, not only has a rail service, but is looking to improve that and getting a lot of support from government to do so. Well, Waikato are very critical to this because, of course, any interregional service would, at the very least, end up in that part of the world. And so working more closely with them to promote those passenger rail improvements will be great. And also having a Bay of Plenty regional passenger rail strategy in the RLTP. As I mentioned in the point before, but worth emphasising again, that next RLTP should really outline funding proposals for business case work to take forward interregional passenger rail. And perhaps most critically, the opportunities with various strategic plans and the future regional spatial strategy should be looking at the policies, plans and delivery around things like clustering development in passenger stations. We have a really good plan for Tauranga city centre, which has had a lot of coverage in the press. But what is missing at the moment is the passenger rail element of that. We have business cases going on looking at potential locations for public transport interchanges. Wouldn't it be great to integrate those with a passenger rail service? And other people have talked about ferries as well. So those really are our main points, and we're very happy to take any further questions. I will hand over to Michael if he's got any other points that he thinks I've missed or wants further re-emphasisation. We've got a quick opportunity to do that. Otherwise, happy to take questions.
I'll just add very briefly, the Tauranga rail corridor, as you well know, is quite challenged at the moment, heading to the west through the Kaimai Tunnel due to congestion. So there's a number of projects that are being identified in the National Rail Plan to relieve congestion, including additional work around crossing loops and passing loops. And also getting through the congested area of Hamilton needs to be addressed. So what we're really saying there is that we need to get in now and engage with the particular parties, including Kiwi Rail and NZTA, to ensure that the work that's done to enhance the freight capacity includes future-proofing for passenger rail services. So timing is relatively critical, and the inquiry presents us the opportunity to make a submission in that regard. And in recent discussions this week with KiwiRail and previously, they very much support Bay of Plenty becoming involved in doing that. So they're ready and waiting to do submissions in the same way that Waikato has been doing up until now. So with that, I'll pass back over to James.
Thank you. So
You're up
happy
to
to take
9
any
minutes,
questions.
James.
That's it. All good, all done. Any questions? Happy to take
We've
them.
got 2 questions, Councillor Thompson and then Councillor Neves.
Yeah, hi James, lovely to see
Hi.
you again. I haven't got a question of you, but I've got a question directed to staff, please. Can we please have information related to the Transport and Infrastructure Select Committee processes, please? So we understand what's going on and what the timeframes are for that. Would that be possible?
They've taken notes of that and I'll get back to you. Councillor Neves.
Thank you, James. Great to see you. And thank you for this presentation. Obviously, a lot of really enthusiastic people are working with you too. 2 questions. One is, can you quickly tell me how your cooperative model works?
I'll do my best. Essentially, a co-op is an organisation which is made up of members who pay a fee to join, and then the model works essentially sharing responsibility for developing strategy. Every member has a say in how the cooperative works. So we don't have one organisation, be it a government, be it a commercial organisation or trade unions, but all of those people can be involved working together to develop a service proposal. At the moment, what we have, certainly in the UK, is a very adversarial approach where all of those parties have different interests. They're not in the same organisation. A co-op would bring not only them together, but community organisations, councils, anyone with an interest in rail. Now, the next phase work is to explore the feasibility of that in detail, because I'm sure there are a lot of questions about how on earth it works. And the point is, at the moment, we need to understand that much better. But the cooperative model is relatively clear. It is democratic. Everyone has a voice. Everyone has a contribution.
Right. So it's more about a cooperative of people planning the service as opposed to delivering the service.
It could be both. And this is the point of the feasibility study, is what is appropriate for a cooperative to do versus not do. We don't have any firm views. What we believe is the co-op model should be explored in its entirety.
Excellent. And my second question, sorry, it's about carbon reduction. Electrification of the rail network. What are your views on that?
I'll let Michael answer that one.
Yeah, electrification of the rail network we see as a long-term priority. Currently, KiwiRail are developing a business case for electrification extension from Te Rapa to Palmerston North, in terms of, Te Rapa to Pukekohe to complete the electrification from Auckland basically to Palmerston North. That's an indicative business case. Moving east towards Tauranga through the Kaimai Tunnel longer term is quite important, particularly as a result of the Kaimai Tunnel. The issues in the Kaimai Tunnel relate to congestions and the build-up of fumes over time as you put more trains on. But in the interim, there's other possibilities to have what they call bi-mode trains, which basically run under overhead when there's wire available, and then they can run under battery or some other type of fuel cell where there's no electrification available. So there are flexibilities and pathways towards that deliverable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, the 2 of you. We've run out of time. So we'll just call it there. James, you can go and have a little sleep and we'll go and have our lunch. How's that sound?
Fantastic.
Thank you both.
Thank you
both, and nice to see you again, James. And I'll look forward to seeing you back in New Zealand soon, I'm sure. It is now 12:41. Can we let's do is half an hour long enough for lunch?
Yes.
I think it is. So that means we're going to be at about 10 to 1, 10 past 1. Order, please. We're about to start. This is to open the adjourned meeting at, what is the time? 1:15. Just to give an indication for timing, we should be out of here by 1:30 is what we're hoping for. Can I now call the Mr. Bronwyn Fox? Mrs. Bronwyn Fox. Okay.
She's on the screen.
She's on the screen. That's submission number 58 for the Disabilities Resource Centre Trust. Yes,
that's one. Yep.
Yeah, Bronwyn, the floor is yours. We can't see your face yet.
No, hang on. There we go. There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. I really only have 3 points I'd like to make based on our submission. The first one is congratulations on, after 20 years of work, providing an amazing accessible bus and public transport experience for people with disabilities and their companions. Congratulations, that's an enormous achievement. And we're very proud that you've done that. So thank you very much. Can we also acknowledge Mary McLaren, who's a Regional Council staff member, for her exceptional work for people with disabilities and ensuring that these projects and accessibility is at the forefront for the council. We'd like to really ask you to work with the territorial authorities around the links for footpaths and landing sites for bus shelters and access point to bus shelters. I think there's a bit of a gap there between the two agencies about making sure that there are safe places for people to get on and off the bus. And to keep pushing out the kneeling bus rollout across the entire Bay of Plenty region. And just one other consideration, that when people get on the bus, they need somewhere to store their mobility equipment, walker, wheelchair and the like. So there needs to be some consideration of that. And Mr. Chairman, just 2 last points. One is that our challenge to the Regional Council is to make sure that all of the information it provides is accessible. And we would encourage you to look at the international standards around accessibility for written and print media and online media to ensure that everybody can access your information appropriately. And my organisation is in particular is looking at the Regional Council as a leader around climate change and carbon emissions. And we would like the Regional Council to consider hosting some workshops around its learnings around climate change and how it can support other entities in making some changes or some options. We travel 1.5 million kilometres a year across the Bay of Plenty. So we need some help. And we know that you're doing some amazing work in this space and we'd love some help from you. So thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly to you today. It's really appreciated.
Rob, I think you can see by the mood of the room that your submission has been very well received. Can I ask, are there any questions of clarification?
I think this, John, would you explain to the people in the room the amount of transport and people you have out and about doing services on a daily basis using vehicles?
Yes, certainly. We as a home care provider employ 200 staff in the field across the Bay of Plenty, and we're one of 7 agencies that do so. So we provide 4,000 visits a week to people in their own homes. So we are travelling in motor vehicles from Cape Runaway to Katikati to Ruatahuna, so across the entire width of the Bay of Plenty, and they are in private vehicles. So yeah, it's an enormous number of miles and people travelling. So thinking sustainably about what we do long term, and given that we're in such rural communities, some thought about that. Does that cover what you wanted, Judy?
Thank you very much. That's what I wanted.
Any further questions? Councillor Neave.
No, just congratulations. You've got some fabulous ideas here. For example, your open day with free travel, just to get people socialised and get out there and try the buses. So thank you very much for your thoughtful submission.
Yeah.
We'd love to support that too by having staff come and support people so that we can make it a fun journey and a fun experience, so we can get more people on these buses. That's what we need. We need the buses to be full.
Thank you. Your submission has been taken on board. We will consider it in deliberations, and staff will send you out our decisions based on it. Thank you very much for coming to us via Zoom. I now call upon Carol Gordon, submission number 39. Carol, the floor is yours. 8 minutes and a couple of minutes for questions is what we're sort of wanting to head towards.
It's very nice to be able to meet with you today and to share some thinking about the plan. Yeah, you know my background and my orientation towards improving travel for elders and for the community as a whole in terms of our planet. If I could have the PowerPoint loaded, please. While it's coming, I'd like to note that Glenn's presentation on targets was extremely helpful. I've got an overview that I'd just like to comment on, having looked at the Wednesday submissions and today, and that there are a lot of comments from the community about customer services. And I'd like to suggest that the Regional Transport Committee holds 6 monthly customer service conversations with the community so that you pick up some of those excellent, like Deb's comments, and that you have a chance to manage those in an operational manner, and that it doesn't have to wait for an occasion such as this. And then we can concentrate on focused strategic discussions. So I looked at the plan that has a key statement early on in the document that says public transport is being reimagined. And I looked for innovation, and you've heard me talk about innovation and present on innovative transport issues from time to time. I'm going to go quickly because I've got a number of slides. However, I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the innovation. I saw adaptation, but not innovation. But I know people care about each other, about climate change, and about the future. People want to save the planet. And it's up to you as a regional council to be transformative. It's such a cliche word, but it's so, the imperative is so great. So I want to say 2 things: that we need systemic structural change to advance democratic inclusion. So I mentioned the operational matters that people cared about, that came and they brought them to you. And that's just one little part of that parcel, really, opening up the conversation. Then leveraging community participation so that we get a mobilised ecosystem of collective action, of which the Wednesday Challenge is a contributor. And then we'll have policies that will be successful because there's community ownership. The issue at the moment, as I see it, is that we haven't done,
We're all part of the puzzle. We haven't done real needs analysis with people. We've done roading. We've done vehicles on roads, and Ufti was the grand example. There was no demographic analysis. It never asked, despite many of us standing up at all the consultations that I attended, all of them, and asked where the demographic analysis was and how were we planning for the future if we didn't know where the people were. And it became a mantra, and we're still not there. We're looking at everything still from a land use base and looking at how we fit roads and vehicles and carry on. So we need strong community ownership of the way forward to get to our climate change targets. People want to be healthy. Public transport's also about healthy. Climate change is about healthy. And so being transformative, I believe that we need community connected mobility. Now I'm putting that word mobility on the page, and I want to challenge you to start using mobility when we talk about public transport as different to transportation and trucks and cars and all that stuff. So let's talk about mobility and people. Mobility is a word that's often used internationally, but it shifts the focus. I suggest that it leads us to considering more about where people want to go and how they want to go there, which is congruent with your mode shift goals. So we don't need to talk about behaviour change because we're actually engaging the people in collaborative action. So connected community mobility has high impact and high value. And it's an ecosystem initiative that requires intentional implementation. And I'm coming to what that intent could be. So health and wellbeing today is regarded as an ecosystem, and you know that. And so we're looking to the future of all people and for the planet and for younger people's future. Here's what I've learned, because I've participated with most of you for a long time. And I've done the research that supports many of the issues that people have raised with you over the last 2 days. I've learned that sharing builds a breadth of understanding, that we learn to care about each other, and that we can therefore grow trust for a common agenda. And that systems haven't changed. We've had lots of words and policy, this and that, and edicts from government and all sorts of system kind of discourse. But it hasn't really changed a great deal. And that our complex challenges, and I've spoken before about the meta changes of the world that include climate change and population ageing and the technological revolution and COVID, they demand real, and I'm just using the word mode shift to mean change, that we actually have to change the way. So if we recognise that everything is connected, people need to be respected partners in a trusted process. And that, I believe, is the question we should address. Oh, sorry. So we need a departure from the top-down hierarchical linear approaches, the roading approaches to public transport, and that we need to be adaptive and agile and have a shared vision that engages and energises an informed community. Our communities are not informed, they're not engaged, and that's why they're not on the buses. So we need to collaborate and accelerate the impact because we all have collective responsibility. So if we recognise that collective responsibility, we can reach out to an informed community and develop trust. So it requires a recalibration, and I thought this diagram really summed up exactly where we're at. That we're trying toward, that we're moving towards a goal that we understand, but we need to advance it through doing things differently. And I just put in there the importance of the COVID reset. internationally, the key social and economic agenda spelt out by whether it's the World Bank, the OECD, the World Economic Forum, the whole bundle talk about social cohesion. And that's the way towards differences in wealth and poverty and difference and inclusion, all those things. And so public transport has such an immense role to play. It really breaks my heart that our buses are empty. So let's decide to talk with our communities about everything. Please, Regional Council, start a whole new mode and begin to talk with people. You know, it goes as far as not having closed agendas. But about all of the things you're thinking about, people would be really interested. So then you can create the new perspectives for yourselves as well as for the community, because we might be in it together, for goodness sake. So I'd like to suggest that you activate a participatory approach to accelerate change and that you use community leaders, not politicians, to facilitate those conversations. I could talk more about that. So please be transformative.
Your time is running, so.
Yes, I'm just on the end. So I think that we should deliver an easy first success model of on-demand transport, and that you should begin in a cooperative and collaborative way with Town and City Council, because they're doing a spatial plan in Otamotai right now. That don't tackle areas that are difficult, like the man from Australia told you yesterday. Doing a linear approach is not what it's about. It's about 50-minute communities. And I've told you about that earlier in my report several years ago. So let's clicking on to that. I want to remind you about the Melbourne Model. So the Melbourne Model allows community-based on-demand transport, not replacing linear routes with on-demand transport that go to somewhere or other that never go quite to where people want, but servicing communities saves emissions, is efficient, serves the people to go where they want to go. And we could have a whole big conversation about this. It's a known and evidenced international model.
Your time is actually up.
Okay.
By over a minute. Without any questions.
Yes, so embrace innovation. Remember that it's sustainable as well as live, work, learn, play and age.
Thank you.
It was a quick trip.
Yeah, well, but we're quick people.
It's all linked into my submission, by the way. Yes. You can follow it through.
We can. And do we have any questions of clarification?
I've got one. On page 2 of your submission, Harold, and thank you very much for the thought you put into it. You say the revised plan should address barriers to progress so that the public can partner. What do you think our key barriers are?
Well, I spoke to them on the slides, in as much as the public aren't engaged enough. Yeah. And so we can't expect to have mode shift if they're not engaged in the conversation, because we wouldn't have those big yellow buses running around if we'd engaged them. I just think that we've got to be participatory and collaborative. And I could talk about different kinds of buses till cows come home and reflect.
No, I'm sure we'll hear from you again. Any further questions?
All about Carol.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. You're always a pleasure to listen to, and your submission will be taken into account, and we will get back to you once we've done our deliberation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We move on now to our last one, which is the Wednesday challenge. Heidi Hughes. Heidi, you have 8 minutes of speaking time and 2 minutes for questions.
Right then. Kia ora, everybody. First of all, I'd like to taipokoro the speakers. They've been amazing. Like the presentations, you know, just so much work and so much effort, and and information. So throughout my talk, I'd like to refer to quite a few of them, because basically that's a backstory of what we're all collectively here to say. Could we have our slides up? Thank you. Stop the time, Andrew. Yeah, right. That's right. As long as the time stops, I'm all good. I know. That's the way you do it.
But it's starting now.
Nice. All right. We are basically sort of proposing this exactly the same as everyone else. It's time for a step change in our system. And I just want to recognise too the work that Bay of Plenty Regional Council has done to bring the bus service to where it is today. Because the bus service, it is a great service, and they are wonderful buses, and they are an excellent option for people if you live in a place where the buses go from or where the buses go to. But the reality around that is that the urban design of the city that we are living in does not cater and will never cater for a fixed route bus service to work for the communities that we're all trying to serve. And I also want to recognise, Lyle, the work that you've done in bringing the pricing and the availability of those bus services to people who have disability issues, and to open that access, because we've done a lot of work together as a community to bring more access to people who, one, have disabilities, but two, school children and those communities to actually access the system that we have already. So that work is really great, but what we're really hearing is that the fixed bus system, it's too far to walk for too many people. It doesn't go to the places that people actually really need it to go. And that's nobody's fault. It's just the fact that our city is designed how it is, so we need to diversify. We need to look at what we do next. I just want to talk about the Wednesday challenge itself. We are kind of a behavioural change project. We are part of the travel demand management system, which is all about changing hearts and minds and bringing people along on the journey. Now, this is a big piece. It's a huge piece of where we want to go. We also need to look at them both together. So I just want to say that the work and the investment that your organisation has put in, it's coming back dividends right now, because we're able to work with that 20% who could and would with the current system. So those are the people we're working with. We are working with the ones that could carpool, could bike, could take a bus, but we are finding that we are coming up against the people all the time who would love to but can't. And that's anecdotal at the moment with the work that we're doing, because we're going to be doing a lot more surveying later on down the track, but we're hearing it here. You've heard it, we hear it all the way through. It's there are the ones that could and would if they had the infrastructure and the systems to be able to do that. So I'm not going to dwell like a long time on all of these, because I'd like to spend a little bit of time at the end getting any questions or feedback, but hopefully you've all read this submission. First of all, the first one around 15% mode shift, I'd like to just refer back to Glenn Crowther's submission. Everything is in there in spades. He's done an incredible job, and that is all the back end story around what we need to do as far as going back to UFTI, going back to our systems plans and rejigging it, because the world has changed. Climate change is in front of us, and we just really need to relook at those documents and go, okay, so where do we go from here? And I believe that we will attract much better government funding if we are prepared to make a plan that really looks at those serious issues. So the second one, fully decarbonised minibus. So this is the bus and minibus system by 2032. If we work with an on-demand system as well as a bus system, we have a lot more potential to early on meet our decarbonisation with the small buses, it's a lot cheaper to make those buses decarbonised, and you tell a much better story for the community. You bring along those hearts and minds before you're making the decisions on a lot of the big buses, which may or may not be electric, they may be hydrogen, or it may be a light rail system, or whatever that looks like. So On Demand had a fantastic, the submission from Lift and Go. This is that piece where we mop up all the gaps in the system at the moment. This is the part of the diversify. We've heard all of us, a lot of the time, all of the speeches that I've heard, an on-demand system overlaid with our current system and really worked together could answer a lot of those questions that we're currently getting asked by people. And the other thing about on-demand transport, it doesn't require infrastructure, so we can get there a lot faster. So rapid transit corridors, obviously, this is already in the TSP, it's all sitting in there. But in our view, we want to look at which one's first and actually get started on one and do one well. If we can do one really well, then we can show what this looks like to the community, and we can start that kind of hearts and minds building that makes them realise why they might want to take parking lanes away from other streets. So in our view, the one that could be looked at first is the Papamoa amount to the city, mainly because it doesn't have the same barriers that a lot of them have, because we've got Hewlett's Road already has a bus lane on it. So, and whereas a lot of the other transit routes, we need to do some serious work around creating transit lanes, or there's already going to be a lot of traffic work done on those in the next few years. So that's what we're suggesting there. So I'm going to just leave that there and move on, because I think I'm going to run way out of time. So that we've just actually taken these rapid transit routes off the TSP document, because as you heard from Alistair yesterday, a lot of that's in train. So let's work together on what we can do in those gaps, and then focus some of use our rapid transit routes and take off some of our more less used routes and put an on demand in between. Look at the ferry service, look at all the options that will bring the hearts and minds of people in the community along. So I just wanted to talk briefly about the timeline. This is one thing that I really felt was super lacking in the document, is people need to understand what is the short, medium, long-term to-do list, and how do we make that really clear for the community too, so that they really know what's happening and what's in the trajectory and where it's all going. And I feel like that's not very well articulated currently. But in our view, if we look at what are the low-hanging fruit, I mean, we've got a very short time frame to get to 2030. So we really have to look at, well, yes, there's a whole lot of infrastructure stuff, but what can we do now, and what can we do in the next few years, and what's the priority areas that will get the biggest bang for our buck to get people out of their cars and onto a different system? And all of those things are going to be ones that don't require those heavy infrastructure work, because that's the ones that take time. When you look at on demand, if you've got traffic management or traffic issues going on, they can go around. So you've got a lot of flexibility in those systems that you don't have when you've got these big roadworks and things going on. Also, as far as the Omakura ferry, etc., there's going to be massive roadworks out there for the next 5 or so years. We've got an opportunity to give that community the chance to actually use a ferry instead and start that transition to mode shift. So I also wanted to say here that there's so many other benefits, knock-on benefits, to getting our public transport right. And when we're looking at the cost of public transport, we need to look at the benefits. And I don't know how we managed to get the business cases differently created, but how do we take these benefits that create placemaking, that can change the way that our whole city feels, if we get people out of the city, single occupancy cars and onto different forms of transport, then we bring that whole placemaking piece into it as well. These are all in Australia. This is work that has been done already in Australia. This ball is rolling overseas. It's rolling everywhere. And we can barely get it done here until we get people onto these other forms of transport. I just wanted to also point you to this study, because I think it's going to be amazing. I was part of this is the one, Judy, that I was suggesting that you take a look at. It's not quite out yet, but this is the travel demand management work, and this is the soft and fluffy behavioural change stuff that transport planners find very difficult to kind of quantify. But it is the piece that we need to really look at now. And this is the stuff that Carol is also talking about. And this is where our space in the Wednesday Challenge comes from. The space of bringing the hearts and minds along, of the soft infrastructure, of the community-led development. I'm going to stop there. Have I got any time left?
No.
Brilliant.
No, you're actually at 9:38, so no time for questions. Questions, clarification only, please.
Great.
I have a question, right? We've had a couple of support from just about everybody for the on-demand service, and now with heat on changes, we might have a chance of actually achieving it. But we've had recommendations in different areas. So we've heard Ultimulti, we've heard Papamoa Mount, we originally thought Tauranga South. So what do you think we should be thinking about when we make a decision on where to start if we go with on-demand?
In my view, if you're doing a trial, I think you should look at the rapid transit route, because we want to get people onto the big bus system as well. The on-demand is never going to get the kind of quantity that we need to move. So we need the big bus rapid transit route to feed people into, to make that a success story as well. And we also need to look at what are the amenity and the population base around those areas that can be fed locally during those times. So I think those companies that do that work, they're the best one. They're doing this work all over the place at the moment. Those Lift and Go, etc., that are doing on demand, that's their profession. So they look at all these factors, and then they'll tell you what is the best place for you to do this kind of work. I think we should go to those professionals in terms of that. I think that, you know, in my view, on demand would be great in any community in Tauranga right now. You know, there is so much need, but if I look at Welcome Bay, for example, I would, in one case, say that would be great, but then there's no amenities for them to move into. So they're all going to get stuck on the bottleneck getting out of there anyway. So you can't really start in there because you're not really actually supporting anything. So you need to have a bunch of amenities that people can get to, and that's going to be really, that's really going to work for the community. So that's why we're suggesting it's really.
Thanks, Heidi. Thanks for your submission. And I just want to acknowledge the work that you have done with you and your colleagues have done with the Wednesday Challenge to have this conversation and actively engage people in the change initiative. I think it's fantastic. I'm interested to know, and you won't be able to tell me now, but when you are in a position to give us not only the data of patronage, but to what extent has this actually influenced mode shift on the Wednesdays? I don't know if there's any data that can be provided that might tell that, and that's my question. But also I think the observation around the best corridor to try rapid transit are those where there's greatest commonality between origin and destination. And I think the Stats New Zealand data will be able to assist us in identifying which of those corridors, be it Papamoa, the Tauranga South, or indeed Ultimulti, has the best match of origins and destinations. But interested in mode shift, if you can give us any insights as to what might be contemplated in understanding what influence Wednesday Challenge has had.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Because it's been so changeable across the whole Omicron crisis, we have kind of left that till later in the piece. And so in the last phase of the challenge, which is September through to November, we're wanting to do a whole lot of kind of a matrix of analysis. I want to work with TCC, for instance, on getting counters on some of the cycle routes, which they already have out there. I want to work with regional council to see to get the bus ridership stats data. I want to work with there's Move-In have also they do phone transport analysis, and they've offered to help us to look at what the traffic movements are across Tauranga. So there's a whole bunch of kind of a matrix of things that we can use to try and assess that. We can also look at parking, possibly, and we can obviously get all the anecdotal evidence, which we're going to be doing around surveys with schools, for instance, to see what impact it has had for them, etc. So there won't be. It's very hard to get one channel of information, but we're really hoping to bring a whole lot of that data together. We might need a bit of help with that, though.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm in trouble. I'm asking you a question. Heidi, through your submission and throughout other submission, references to Vision 2032. So Vision 2032 is a collaborative, it's a collaboration between whom?
Yeah, so we all just sat around the usual suspects. We had a whole bunch of advocates around the table. We've had Carol, we've had Glenn, we've had Kat, we've had Julian Fritter, we had Tina, we've had, who else was around the table? So basically it's a collection, and we all just put up a big board and said, what are we all, and we all have our angles of it, obviously, but generally we're all really, our main points are very clearly aligned in terms of those key points around, one, we need to up our transformational change, diversify the transport system, relook at UFTI and get our climate targets way up there. And I just wanted to also mention what I didn't get a chance to mention, but I'll just take the opportunity now, is the pricing. I think Stephen, the road pricing, we are the biggest port and we do have a lot of truck movements, and a lot of our roading costs go into providing access to the port. So we really need to lobby really hard with government to look at what that mechanism could look like, and then I think ring fence it around how we put that into public transport and active transport solutions.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Regional Council, can we just absolutely applaud the Wednesday challenge, which involves you and your team, and Enviro Hub as well. Fantastic initiative, but I just have to say the submissions we've heard have just been outstanding. So thank you very much indeed.
And Heidi, you'll be really pleased to know that we now have a dashboard that we can actually see on a daily basis exactly what our passage numbers are, and we can break it down by categories and whatever. So we've made some huge progress, and Stephen's been asking for this for a while, and I'll show it to him next week how to access that. So the data is suddenly we're actually getting there, and so I've got a table of all the data for the last 3.5 months just for Tauranga to have a look at on a daily basis where things are moving.
Great.
So that's something that we've been working on for a long time, but it's finally happened.
Yeah,
so,
nice.
So it's nice to know.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
The dashboard will be rolled out to all councillors on Monday.
Oh, thank you so much. Nice to know.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your submission. That's the end of the submissions that we've heard. The calibre of submissions has been exceptionally good, and I thank everyone for their patience. And I know I tried to push it through hard and keep the time. I'm on a tight schedule, I have to confess, because I've got a meeting later on this afternoon in Auckland. So
you go by bus.
And I am not going by bus.
Are you driving up?
Yeah.
Don't speak now.
No, that's